If you've lost weight and your stomach still won't shrink, this video is going to explain exactly why, and it has almost nothing to do with willpower. Here's what most people don't know. The fat sitting around your belly isn't one thing. Some of it is just sitting under your skin, harmless, mostly cosmetic. But underneath that, wrapped directly around your liver, your pancreas, and your intestines, is a second, far more dangerous kind of fat called visceral fat. It's the fat quietly driving diabetes, fatty liver disease, heart disease, and for people over 40 especially, it behaves completely differently than it did in your 20s and 30s. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why that shift happens after 40, the single most common mistake people make trying to fix it, and the specific foods, drinks, and workouts that target visceral fat directly, all backed by real clinical research, not guesswork. Disclaimer: this video is for educational purposes only, and not to be used as medical advice or care. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comment section where you are watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Here's how this is going to break down. First, I'll show you why your body starts storing fat differently after 40. This is the part almost nobody talks about. Then we'll cover the exact foods and drinks that target visceral fat. After that, the workouts that outperform everything else in the research. And I'll close with a simple weekly framework you can actually stick to. So stay with me, because a few of these points connect to each other later in the video. Let's start with the part that changes everything. Visceral fat isn't just about calories in and calories out. It's deeply tied to hormones, and that relationship shifts hard once you hit your 40s and 50s. If you're a woman going through the menopausal transition, this is critical to understand. As estrogen declines, research shows a direct shift in how your body stores fat. Before menopause, visceral fat typically makes up somewhere around 5 to 8% of total body fat. After menopause, that can climb to 15, even 20%. Estrogen normally directs fat toward the hips and thighs. That's the classic pear shape. But when estrogen drops, the body starts redirecting that same fat toward the abdomen instead, and this can happen even without any real change in your diet or your weight on the scale. If you're a man, the story is a little different, but just as real. Testosterone doesn't crash the way estrogen does at menopause. It declines gradually over the years. But research consistently shows that men with lower testosterone carry more visceral fat. We're given test 24. And here's the part that really proves the connection isn't just a coincidence. In studies where men with low testosterone osterone replacement, their visceral fat measurably went down. That tells us testosterone itself plays a direct causal role in where your body decides to store fat, not just a loose correlation. Now let's add one more piece to this puzzle, because this one surprises almost everyone. Sleep. There's a well-controlled study out of Mayo Clinic where researchers tracked healthy adults through periods of restricted sleep. After just 2 weeks of shortened sleep, visceral fat increased by around 11%. And here's the part that should really catch your attention. Body weight on the scale barely moved, about 1 pound. If these researchers hadn't used a CT scan, that visceral fat gain would have gone completely undetected. The mechanism behind this is cortisol, your body's main stress hormone. Poor sleep spikes cortisol, especially in the evening, and elevated cortisol specifically tells your body to direct incoming energy toward abdominal fat rather than anywhere else. So let's pull this together. If you're over 40 and you feel like your body is storing fat differently than it did 15 years ago, you are not imagining that. Your hormones are quite literally rerouting where fat goes. This isn't a motivation problem, it's biology. And that's actually good news. Because once you understand the mechanism, you can work with your body instead of fighting it blind. Now, before we get into food and exercise, I want to explain what visceral fat actually is, because this matters for everything that follows. Visceral fat wraps around your internal organs, and unlike the fat sitting under your skin, it's metabolically active. That means it doesn't just sit there. It actively releases inflammatory compounds directly into your bloodstream, which is a big part of why it's linked to so many chronic conditions. Here's something you'll often hear repeated online, that the number on the scale doesn't really matter. And that's actually true here, but probably not for the reason you think. Hold on to that thought, because I'm going to show you exactly why a little later in this video, once we get to the exercise research. It'll make a lot more sense once you see the data. Let's move into what to actually eat and drink to target this specific kind of fat. The first thing I want you to focus on is carotenoids. Carotenoids are the natural pigments behind the orange in carrots, the red in tomatoes, and the deep green in leafy vegetables like spinach. But that color is really just a side effect. The real function of carotenoids is as powerful antioxidants. Visceral fat accumulation is heavily driven by excess energy that eventually leads to inflammation and a disrupted metabolism. Carotenoids help interrupt that process by neutralizing free radicals, these unstable molecules that damage your cells and disrupt how your genes function. And specifically, carotenoids can help switch on genes that burn more fat, while quieting down the genes that tell your body to store it. There's a randomized, double-blind trial out of Japan that looked directly at this. Researchers found that just 8 weeks of eating carotenoid-rich vegetables reduced visceral fat in participants, and the strongest results came from the group eating foods rich in lycopene alongside cruciferous vegetables like cabbage. But here's the important part. Every single group in that study that ate more carotenoid-rich vegetables saw a reduction in visceral fat, not just one specific combination. So practically, this means you don't need to chase one perfect vegetable. Just aim for color variety across your week. Carrots, sweet potatoes, bell peppers, spinach, squash, tomatoes. Any colorful fruit or vegetable is likely rich in some form of carotenoid, and it's working in your favor. Next, let's talk about catechins. These are flavonoid polyphenols, and just like carotenoids, they act as antioxidants that reduce inflammation. My favorite source of catechins is green tea. And yes, the idea that green tea helps burn fat is actually well supported. Catechins change how your body handles fat, and specifically visceral fat, in a few different ways. First, they boost fat oxidation and energy expenditure by stimulating your nervous system to burn more fat overall. On top of that, catechins inhibit an enzyme called lipase, which is responsible for processing dietary fat, so they help block some of that fat from being absorbed in the first place. Green tea is especially effective because it naturally contains caffeine as well, and caffeine works synergistically with catechins to enhance fat burning even further. There's a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized trial, also out of Japan, that tested this directly. Just 12 weeks of drinking catechin-rich green tea, about 600 milligrams of catechins per day, led to a significant reduction in visceral fat compared to placebo. One practical note here, most green teas contain catechins, but if you want to maximize the benefit, look for green teas that are minimally processed, like matcha or sencha. Now here's something I want to correct, because it's one of the most widely shared health statistics online, and almost everyone repeats it incorrectly. You've probably seen the claim that eating 10 extra grams of soluble fiber a day cuts belly fat by 3.7%. That statistic is real. It comes from a well-known study out of Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center, but it's been misreported constantly across the internet. What the study actually found is that participants with higher soluble fiber intake had a slower rate of visceral fat gain over 5 years. Not that fiber actively melted fat away. It's still a meaningful, well-supported finding. Fiber genuinely helps protect against visceral fat accumulation over time, but it's not the overnight fix that a lot of content online makes it sound like. Good sources of soluble fiber include apples, green peas, beans, and oats. And building toward 25 to 30 grams of total fiber a day is a solid, research-backed target. Of course, in the bigger picture, anything that creates a genuine calorie deficit will help you lose weight and reduce visceral fat over time. But targeting these specific foods and drinks helps you get there meaningfully faster because they're working on the underlying biology, not just the math. Now let's move into exercise, because once you've dialed in the right foods, the right movement becomes the multiplier that makes everything else work faster. There's a large meta-analysis covering 117 studies that compared diet and exercise directly. It found that diet tends to have a bigger effect on total body weight loss, but exercise has a superior effect specifically on reducing visceral fat. And there's an older study that really drives this point home. In this study, participants did just 2 45-minute cycling sessions per week at a challenging but sustainable intensity for 2 months. The result was a 48% reduction in visceral fat, almost half, in just 2 months. On top of that, insulin sensitivity improved by 41%, and subcutaneous fat dropped by 18%. This wasn't extreme or exhausting exercise. It was 2 sessions a week, at an intensity that would put most people in a low to moderate range, the kind where you could still hold a conversation, but you'd sound a little winded. And here's the detail that really matters, the one I asked you to remember earlier. In that same study, total body weight barely changed on the scale. These participants saw massive changes in visceral fat and insulin sensitivity, with almost nothing to show for it if they'd only been weighing themselves. This is exactly why the scale can be such a poor indicator of real progress. If you're doing everything right with your food and your movement, but the number on the scale isn't dropping the way you expect, please don't get discouraged. The scale simply doesn't capture changes in body composition or where fat is actually being lost from. So what's the single most effective type of exercise for targeting visceral fat quickly? A recent systematic review and meta-analysis covering 84 randomized controlled trials found that vigorous aerobic exercise and high-intensity interval training, or HIIT, are the most effective approaches specifically for reducing visceral fat. Resistance training was still beneficial, just less effective for this particular type of fat. That doesn't mean you should skip resistance training altogether, though. It's essential for preserving muscle mass, which becomes especially important after 40, since muscle mass naturally starts to decline with age, and maintaining it is critical for your overall metabolism and long-term health. If you're choosing between high-aid and steady aerobic exercise, the research shows there really isn't a meaningful difference in effectiveness between the two for adults. There might be a very slight edge for running over cycling within HEAD specifically, and some evidence that HEAD performs a bit better in people under 24, but for most of us, we're really splitting hairs at that point. Realistically, it doesn't matter much whether you choose HIIT or steady cardio, or whether you cycle, run, row, or dance. The best exercise is always the one you'll actually stick with, because consistency beats a perfect plan every single time. A textbook perfect workout you dread and only do twice a month will always lose to a walk you actually enjoy and can do several times a week. Based on the available research, a solid target would be exercising at least 2 to 3 times a week, for around 45 minutes each session, at a moderate to vigorous intensity, meaning your heart rate sits somewhere around 70 to 80% of your maximum. If you're not tracking heart rate, the simplest method is the talk test. If you can speak in full sentences but sound a little out of breath, that's moderate intensity. If you can only get out a few words before needing to pause and breathe, that's vigorous intensity. And here's something worth knowing. The benefits of exercise are dose-dependent, meaning more consistent activity generally produces proportionally better results. A study published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine found that participants who exercised more frequently, or at higher intensity, saw greater reductions in visceral fat. Interestingly, that same dose-response pattern doesn't hold for calorie restriction. There's a limit to how much cutting calories actually helps, and beyond a certain point, restricting further doesn't produce additional benefit. So you do not need to starve yourself to lose belly fat. In fact, it's the opposite. Eat enough to stay in a modest, sustainable calorie deficit, and let your exercise consistency do the heavier lifting. And this actually brings me to the single biggest mistake I see people over 45 make when they're trying to fix this. They chase the number on the scale instead of chasing consistency. We just walked through study after study showing that visceral fat, insulin sensitivity, and body composition can all improve dramatically with barely any change in body weight. If you're only measuring success by what the scale says, you might quit right before you start seeing the results that actually matter for your long-term health. So let's bring everything together into something simple you can actually follow, starting this week. First, aim for 2 to 3 sessions of moderate to vigorous cardio each week, somewhere between 30 and 45 minutes per session. Second, add in 2 sessions of resistance training weekly to protect your muscle mass, which matters more with each passing year after 40. Third, build 1 to 2 servings of colorful, carotenoid-rich vegetables into your day, rotating your colors rather than eating the same one every day. Fourth, if you enjoy it, 2 to 3 cups of green tea daily, ideally matcha or sencha, can genuinely help. Fifth, gradually work toward 25 to 30 grams of fiber a day, prioritizing soluble sources like beans, oats, and fruit. And finally, protect your sleep. Treat 7 or more hours as a non-negotiable part of this plan, not an afterthought, because we now know poor sleep alone can quietly undo a lot of the work you're putting in everywhere else. So to recap everything we covered today, after 40, your body isn't broken, and you're not lacking willpower. Your hormones, whether that's declining estrogen, gradually falling testosterone, or cortisol from poor sleep, are actively rerouting where your body stores fat. Now you understand exactly why that happens. Target it with color-rich foods, the right kind of green tea, real fiber sources rather than chasing overnight fixes, and consistent moderate to vigorous movement rather than extreme dieting. And remember, the scale is not always telling you the truth about your progress. If this helped you understand your own body a little better, hit the like button and let me know in the comments, what's one thing from this video you're going to try first? Subscribe to Health Reprogram so you don't miss next week's deep dive. I'll see you in the next one.